Okay, good morning, everyone. This was the second survey that we ran. We ran our first one in 2022. So some of you may have filled the 2 surveys in for us. And we did the survey in 2022 because we'd had a couple of years when, because of lockdowns, we weren't able to meet with our members. So we hadn't been able to have any conferences. We'd done a number of webinars, but it wasn't the same. So in 2022, it gave us a good feel and really good information about the issues and concerns that people had at that point in time. And it gave us so much valuable information that we wanted to repeat the survey. We kept the majority of questions the same so that we could compare the situation in 2022 to the present day. But we also looked at a couple of new topics. We looked at adherence to medication, and we looked in more detail around COVID, particularly around vaccinations and the availability of antivirals if you were unfortunate enough to catch COVID. So that gives you a summary of the people that replied this year. Hilary's already mentioned we had a fantastic response of over 1,100 people. Something we didn't know until the results of this survey were the split between the number of people that had CLL and those that had SLL. Nobody had been able to tell us what the percentage of people with SLL was. So of our respondents, we had just 33 with SLL. The split between male and female responses kind of reflects the number of people that are signed up to receive our newsletter. So on our mailing list, we do have more females on that mailing list than we have males. That tells you the status of people that responded. So over half were on active monitoring. This year, we gave more detail to our definition of remission, and our definition of remission for the purposes of the survey was that you were back on active monitoring after treatment. Remission obviously can be defined in other ways. You could, today, your CLL could be in remission, but you could be on a continuous therapy, so you could still be on treatment. But for the purpose of the survey, when you see an answer concerning remission, that is the definition that's being used. Hilary's going to talk about 4 specific topics of interest. We will also give more information in our next newsletter of the results. And those people who said they would like more information at the end of the survey about the results will get direct contact from us and with more detailed data there. And to follow on from what Hilary told you about the EHAR poster, we're also hoping to publish the results of the survey and to have them accepted by a medical journal. So that's something we'll be working on for the rest of this year, so that that data can then be made available for other researchers and academics. So, thank you, Hilary.
Thank you, Debbie. So we could have been here all day talking about this, but we were restricted by John, who said, you're the ones that are between people and a coffee break. So we recognized the limitation, and we've decided there were 4 topics we wanted to talk to you about in particular. The thing that we're not talking about today that we did also ask about was what you thought about CLL support. We're not sharing it because it's bad news. It's actually very good news, but we wanted to talk to you today about 4 things that we thought you'd most want to go away knowing about. So the first area is vaccinations and COVID. So we asked people which of you had had a COVID vaccine in the last 9 months. That was the survey was live in April, so that took us back to last summer. So it was in effect the last year, but we happened to say 9 months. 77% of you had had a vaccine. This is always of the 1,110 who replied. I mean, we need to recognize that. This isn't we can't guarantee this is the CLL community, but this is the people that have replied to us. So just over 3/4 of you had had a COVID vaccine in the last 9 months. And that's quite interesting because if you go back to 2 years ago, I think 98% of people then had had the COVID vaccine at that point when we were right in the middle of the whole survey. But I think there's a question of people working out whether it's right for them or whether it's possible for them. But same result as before, that virtually all of you had had an annual flu vaccine. So by this survey this year, 67%, so 2/3 of you had had COVID. 79% of that, so 4 out of 5 of those people, which had actually told the authorities, if you like, the right people, that they'd got COVID. But more than 1 in 3 of those were not then offered antivirals. And this had been quite a matter of discussion on the under 60s WhatsApp group that we have. And so we wanted to find out a bit more about that. So first of all, this slide tells you about who's had all the vaccines. And you can see the COVID vaccine is there at 77%. The flu vaccine is, I think, is the bottom one. I'm not quite showing all the pictures on here. The layout's slightly different, but the detail is there. That we'll be sharing with you afterwards. So that's the 90% with the flu jab. And then Shingrix, for example, has increased a lot since last time because it's been made more widely available to people. And then the experience of having COVID. So of the 79% who had COVID and reported it, 36% weren't offered antivirals, and we've got some reasons. So the biggest area, the grey area, is that people were told they weren't ill enough. The orange area is that it was too late after people reported their symptoms for them to have the antivirals. And the 26, they're the ones we're most worried about. Although if you work out the numbers, 26 of 36 of 79, it's not an enormous number, but it's the principle of the thing. We're told that they weren't eligible to have antivirals. And that's wrong. Because we've got a blood cancer, because we've got certain markers ticked in our records, we are eligible to have antivirals if we meet the other criteria. So we're going to make sure that we tell people where they need to go to say things if they're ever turned down in the future. So that was a question we particularly explored because of concerns that we'd heard, and we came up with something that was interesting. The second area we wanted to talk about today is fatigue. So fatigue was mentioned by 58% of respondents, over twice the mentions of any other symptom. I'll show you a chart in a minute. What we explored for the first time was whether the experience of fatigue was different for people on active monitoring or on treatment or in remission. And 58% of people on active monitoring reported fatigue as a sign or symptom, 62% on treatment, and 52% of people in remission. And the person who helped us with the analysis was very clear at pointing out that the 62% on treatment is actually significantly higher than the 58% on active monitoring. So there is a statistically provable difference between those figures. It's not just to do with chance. But the thing that most impressed Debbie and me was that over half of each of the 3 groups reported fatigue as the most common sign and symptom. So we're going to go away and work out what more can we do to try and explore fatigue, explore your experiences of fatigue, and explore what might be able to be done to help you with fatigue, or what things you could possibly do to make the situation better for yourselves. So this is an area of ongoing interest to us. It was from 2 years ago, but we're even more interested in it now. And then one of the other questions we asked, the third bullet point here, was about the impact that your symptoms might have on your day-to-day life. And the ones that rated highest were anemia, fatigue, getting infections, and a high temperature. So they were the ones that most came through. And what's really important about this is that we realised when we discussed this at the board meeting last week, that we need to be working out how we can best help you when you visit your clinician, your medical team, to tell them about the things that are happening to you that they need to know about. Because it might be that people aren't automatically asked about bleeding and bruising, or it might be that you might not be automatically asked about how many infections have you had, or how many courses of penicillin have you had. So we think there might be more information there that we could help people present to their medical team to help their team decide how best to look after them. So that was an interesting sort of combined finding that was coming out of this. Just a couple of slides for you. So this is how many people mentioned each of them, and you can see fatigue is the big orange block on the left, and then it goes down, fades through the other symptoms. And you could, of course, tick as many as you were experiencing. The next area I want to talk about is the impact on your quality of life. So when we did the survey 2 years ago, we were really keen to find out what had been the difference on your quality of life, both from a physical perspective and an emotional perspective, before and we were then during the pandemic. We wanted to find out how big an impact the pandemic had had on you with your diagnosis, and if your partner had the diagnosis. And we could see that there was higher impact in both areas during COVID. And now we're past COVID, we can still see that there's that difference. People are still more concerned. We've all had to change slightly how we do things because of the pandemic. So we've still got higher figures than we had before the pandemic. The second point is that the physical emotional impact is higher during treatment, but it's not absolutely enormously higher, but it is higher during treatment. The other interesting thing that the way you measured, and you're all measuring all these things out of 10, was that the impact was found to be greater for women than for men. But the most interesting finding, if you like, or the most unexpected finding 2 years ago, and it's still the same now, is that the impact on the physical and emotional quality of life of partners and carers is higher than it is for the people with CLL. So we're here for everybody with CLL and their partners and carers. And so to have a finding that says, well, actually the partners and carers are being more affected than the people with CLL is something that we're very much going to take away and try and do something about. You can see the figures here, but I've just got a couple of slides with some figures on, diagrams for you. So this one here is about the physical and emotional impact of people at different stages of their CLL experience. So the green one is people in active monitoring. That's the lowest impact on both sides. The yellow one is the physical and emotional impact of people during treatment. And then the blue one is the impact for people who are in remission, in the way that Debbie said that we analysed it. So that's the diagram of those particular results. And then this is the diagram of the difference between patients and carers. So the patients are the darker colours, the darker green, the darker blue. The carers are the paler colours. So every time the carers are rating the impact on their quality of life, the physical and the emotional impact, on average, we're all different, but on average, significantly higher than people with CLL are. Well, this is an absolutely phenomenal opportunity for us to try and explore this. It's something that's come through. It's why we're so keen with our Support Act offering that I mentioned earlier, that's available for people with CLL and for the carers of them. So that was a really interesting finding. And the fourth area I said I'd mention was taking medications. So we've been talking about research, and the exciting thing with research is you don't know what you're going to find out when you start. So you ask questions, and sometimes you get things and you think, yes, I thought it might say that, and now I can prove it. But sometimes you get things that say, oh, well, that looks a bit straightforward. But actually, it's really, really important, because all the medications that we take are phenomenally effective for CLL, but they're very expensive. And we want to make sure that people get the best out of their medication. So we were actually, even though it's not a good story, we were really pleased to discover that nearly everybody on treatment take all their medications as prescribed. So, and that's a really good message to be able to feed back to pharmaceutical companies. Just under half of us use a reminder to help us to remember to do so. Those that have been diagnosed a bit more recently are more likely to use some assistance like that. It might be because you're a bit younger. Very few have missed a dose in the last 4 weeks, either accidentally or consciously. We did talk about this at one of our conferences, but we said, well, nobody's going to tell us in person in a conference that they haven't been taking the tablets or the infusions. Well, haven't really got much choice about infusions, but they haven't been taking the tablets. So we thought we'll ask them in the questionnaire. So this was a new part of the questionnaire where we were wanting to find out, you know, now nobody knew who you were, what you were going to tell us. And so it's really good to know that people are really good at taking tablets. Women miss slightly fewer doses than men of the doses that are missed. So that's just an interesting line. My husband is smiling at me. He has his own system for making sure he takes his, not CLL, his other medication every day, and it works for him. But I try and beat the system before he's even thought about it by saying, have you had these yet? So perhaps this is what we're all doing, or why we're even more concerned about it. So those are the findings that we wanted to share with you today as we take you to your coffee break. Later on this afternoon, you're going to have a chance in your roundtables to talk about 3 topics. We're going to be talking about fatigue, and in what ways does fatigue affect you? We're going to be talking about partners and carers and how can we support them? And then the third one comes back to the point that Debbie made at the beginning, that the membership of CLL support is sort of 50-55, well, about 55% female, that's a rough figure. Whereas the people diagnosed with CLL are about 63% male. So women are much more likely to engage with CLL support than men. So we thought we'd have a third question in the groups about engaging men in support groups, and what can we do to talk about that, to make sure that we're equally accessible to everybody as we're spreading the word. So I think that takes us through to the coffee break.